From Boca Raton, Florida, this is Behind the Bima. On this episode, the rabbis are joined by Eylon Levy, former social media personality turned Israeli government spokesman, who dives deep into the complexities of the Israel-Gaza conflict, talks about media representation, and about the need for effective communication in times of crisis. And Jake Turx, the Senior White House Correspondent for Ami magazine, known for his unique position as a visibly observant Jew in the press room of the White House. Jake shares his journey from a troubled student to a critical questioner of power and advocacy for Jewish causes. Plus, BRS's Pesach market and discussion about the men's seder. All this and more, Behind the Bima.
Welcome to Behind the Bima, Erev Pesach edition, our last episode till after Pesach. Always a tremendous joy to be here with my dear friends and colleagues, Rabbi Philip Moskowitz and Rabbi Joshua Broide. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. Getting ready for Pesach in Pesach mode, Pesach zone. We got two special guests tonight, a little episode on Jewish media personalities.
Right.
Very, very different. Eylon Levy, who was Israel's official government spokesman, is not any longer, but has a Start of a Nation podcast, a wonderful podcast. Want to highly recommend and promote and share. Find them on any podcast player. State of a Nation. Great interviews and great commentary, great insights on what's going on, and really, in some ways, continuing to be a spokesman for Israel, but without any of the shackles that were holding him back before. And Jake Turx. Jake, a friend. Jake is a wonderful, unusual personality, blending his Hasidic background, and today the White House correspondent for Ami magazine. Ami magazine has a seat in the press room at the White House, and really two Jewish media personalities, but very different. Excited to bring them. But first, even more excited to bring two other tremendous personalities, Rabbi Moskowitz and Rabbi Broide. What's going on, gentlemen?
Maybe a future White House correspondent right here.
Maybe. Representing Behind the Bima.
Exactly. Press credentials.
Press credentials.
Oh, we also just got ready. We're starting to prepare for the seder right now. We had a fantastic event the other night. A couple of the rabbis, and that was really special. Got to learn a lot from both of you.
Tell us about that event.
We had almost 100 guys. Really, I guess you'd say people that are going to be leading their seders, and they were looking for some material, some good stuff. So you could go and you could do it in shul, like I'm sure some of the places out there are doing. Here, you could take a couple of Dvar Torahs. Here you go, or you could do it with a four-course meal, 5-star event. You know, where you have great wine and some other great drinks, and it was just really, really amazing.
It was fun. We went through all the parts of the seder. Thank you, Rabbi Moskowitz, for putting it together. It was really great. 4 rabbis, 4 courses, 4 cups, and every step of the seder. Lots more than 4 divrei Torah. And
I think I might have drank Eliyahu's cup also. I might have drank the 5th one.
You might have hit the 5th cup too.
Yeah.
People, I got great feedback on it. A lot of enjoyment. These notions of the sort of man seder have been around for a little while, trying to prep people. Not to the exclusion. We do plenty of women's learning, women's programming, women's shiurim, women's Pesach prep. But we didn't get any negative feedback. I expected to get beaten up. I feel like the people who beat up the man seder have just gotten tired with it already. What do you say, Moskowitz? You get any feedback on it?
I got great feedback. The guys who came really loved it. Again, I think we take it for granted that most people don't really prepare for the seder until they get to the seder. So if for nothing else, this gave guys a week advantage, head start on preparing for their seder, thinking about what they wanted to say. It was great also. We didn't just give divrei Torah. We gave little tidbits, little piece of advice along the way of how we run our seders, of advice for them that they run their seders. So I think for the average guy, it's not something you usually talk about. You don't get together with friends and be like, hey, how'd you run your seder? Do you have any ideas? So this is a great opportunity to both hear from us, but also just to sit next to guys and be like, what's something cool you do at your seder that I could take advantage of? And to me, one of the best parts was, at one point we took questions and answers. And it was clear that there were just parts of the seder that we've been doing by rote or mechanically or in a robotic fashion for years. And guys loved the opportunity to be able to step forward and be like, why do we do that, by the way? And to hear our answers. I think it was great.
Yeah. Why and how and what. It's great.
Right. A little magic, turning some water into wine or something like that.
Yes.
Gotta make it.
Yeah. When we say at the seder that we want to keep the children interested, we want to keep Rabbi Broide interested. If it keeps Rabbi Broide interested, we're good to go.
We're good.
We are good to go.
Although I will say, Rabbi Broide, you definitely set the record. I mean, Rabbi Goldberg had a few sheets of paper. I think 1 safer. Rabbi Blumenthal had 2. You came with a stack. I mean, you had 6, 7 of them.
And Rabbi Goldberg reminded me, he's like, now you can't use those at the seder because now they're all chametz. But might be a little in trouble right now. But But it's great. It's great getting ready. And today, even at BRS, I mean, there is an incredible Kiddush Hashem taking place. It's not the first time, but it's become a
Market. We got
a
the pay what you
chazak
want
in it.
market, Pesach market. We've ordered trucks and trucks and trucks, fruits, vegetables, eggs, dry good, 1,000 pounds of hand shmur matzah in conjunction with our dear friend Yedidya Harush, who complicated this year because his matzah factory produced a lot of matzah. He was in Gaza when he should have been out there selling. And mitzvah goreres mitzvah, the opportunity to, thanks to a generous anonymous donor, buy 1,000 pounds of that hand shmur matzah and help him, and at the same time distribute it to people who need. You know, the cost of matzah, think about it, it's flour and water. And I'm not minimizing places charge what they do because it's expensive to produce, but it's very expensive to produce. And yeah, I don't know, next person who wants to leave $1 billion, not just to endow a medical school, maybe we should endow hand shmura matzah for Jewish people. It's another good use. But it's so yeah, we're really proud of it. Hundreds of families come. Today we put out the call to try to raise the rest of the money, and we can still use more, but made enormous headway, thank God, and getting close to our budget to be able to help people. And it's not just the poor, the indigent. We're not looking for the people who really, it's the middle class. It's the people who are slammed and hammered and struggling, and they need relief. They just need relief. How do I get through this month's paycheck with all the additional expenses, days off of work because of Yontif? And they just, here's some relief. And the whole idea is pay what you want. Take a box, fruits, vegetables. And if you want to pay exactly what it costs us, which is the wholesale cost, pay that. And you'll feel like you didn't take anything. And if you want to pay more, pay more. And if you want to pay less, pay what you can afford. Nobody's looking, nobody's counting, nobody's doing anything. And we do it now before Shannon, before Yom Kippur. Shlomi Legassi, his brainchild, he was the first. He once ordered one pallet, put it outside my office. People came, took a few oranges, and it's grown into this. And Shlomi is just a machine of chesed. And it's fantastic, and we're excited about it.
It's amazing.
Yeah, the beautiful part is it's not just the Kiddush Hashem, obviously locally, seeing the people who come, and you can tell the story. Last year we had a group of non-Jews who came, who heard about it, and they were interested in partaking of our goods as well, and we gave them because it was a Kiddush Hashem. But even internationally, I was in Teaneck last year, right around this time, and it was amazing that people knew about it. People were talking about it. People were saying what a point of light it is and a point of pride for the Jewish community. And, different communities, every community on their own is trying to replicate it, trying to figure out what's the secret sauce that they can do something similar in their community, because it's a beautiful thing. And it's mitzvah gereres mitzvah, not just in the sense of the pallets of the matzah, but it's the kids who come to volunteer. It's the people who drive by and see it in action and give. It's the people who are able to partake. And everyone wins when they drive by our campus over the next 2 days and they see it, because the givers, those people who are the recipients, it's just beautiful for everyone.
It is. And I'll tell you that our local, people worry, are the local kosher supermarkets upset at you? We undercutting them? Not only they're not upset, they're doing an incredible job on their own right. This time of year, they give out many, many food cards so people can shop with dignity who need help. They give it off, give it through the local rabbis at a discount. And, I know there are people upset about the prices. We're not commenting on that. I'm not defending them. I'm not criticizing them. I think it's a complicated question. They definitely go up a lot. And I don't know if there were some objective party who could help review that, but they also do their part, and they help a lot of people in ways that people don't know, and they deserve credit for that. So they're not upset, and they partner with us in that, and we're excited. And Wednesday, Thursday, 4 to 10 p.m. I don't know when you're listening to this or watching this, but Wednesday and Thursday before Pesach, 4 to 10 p.m. If you need some relief, or you want to help, or you want to contribute, definitely come on down to Boca Raton Synagogue, and we would love it. We would love it. So Rabbi Moskowitz, press room. You got one shot in the press room. They call on you. You raise your hand. What's your question?
To who? Who am I in the press room with?
You're with the president's press secretary.
President's press secretary. I got one question. My question is, that's a good question. Rabbi Broide,
you're in the press room. I'm going to buy Rabbi Moskowitz some time. I'll tell you what, you're in the press room either in the White House or in Israel, the prime minister's press room. You could ask either one a question. What's your question?
It's a good question.
See, I wouldn't ask it. I would show appreciation.
A statement. Thank you for supporting Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would show appreciation, because whether you agree, fully disagree, these are really complicated issues. I know for some people they're simple, but they're complicated, and there are geopolitical factors, and we get all of that. And I think the more we as a community do a good job of expressing our appreciation for those moments where they are there for us. I mean, the fact that there were hundreds of rockets and drones shot at Israel, and because of a multinational, alliances, they were shot down largely before they even got to Israel, with Jordan, with Saudi Arabia, with America. I mean, it's astounding what's been accomplished.
Miracle.
And I do think whether we fully agree, disagree, again, everyone's allowed their political opinion,
Yeah.
but as you wrote so astutely, we have to be appreciative at those moments for what's, it was human hands that built all those missile defense systems, but they were funded. They were funded by countries. They were funded by America. They were, other countries
Absolutely.
gave us airspace. And I think it's important to express that appreciation.
I
So
got
you
one.
wouldn't ask a question. You'd raise
I
your
got
hand
a
and say,
question.
I want to, Mr. President, administration, I just want to thank you. Okay.
And then maybe I would
Broide.
push a little bit.
I got a question. I would
Not only
say,
do I appreciate what you've done and hopefully what you will do, but it's important that you stand strong and proud, even though there are forces on the fringes that are pushing you into places where you might not want to go. Just know that you've been doing the right thing. We appreciate it. The Jewish community in America and around the world.
I love it.
Broide, what's your question?
Would you like to be a guest on Behind the Bima? And then we could ask more questions.
That's like the genie in the bottle. What's your
Yeah.
one wish?
What's your one wish?
Limitless wishes.
What about you,
Yeah.
Rabbi Goldberg?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I would ask a question about what is a country's responsibility if their citizens are held hostage to bring them home? And is there more America could do for its Americans? Leave Israel out. American citizens are being held in Gaza by Hamas. Do we take that out on Qatar? Do we confront, what more can or should we be doing? Because not necessarily about Israel, although there's a lot of questions about Israel, but even about American citizens in this conflict. How tragic. You saw that Rachel Poland Goldberg is one of Time Magazine's People of the Year. What a tragic way to be a Person of the Year, because she's still waiting her son Hirsch, and we're thinking of him, and obviously all the hostages. We like many others, we didn't invent this, but we're encouraging people to designate a chair at the seder table for hostages. We made a poster with a collage of those hostages that say, "Let our people go," because it's thousands of years later, Pesach, and we're still saying, "Let our people go."
And anyone here can download it. Just go to our website.
Yeah, go to the shul website, brosonline.org, download it, put up a picture, because hopefully the hostage families will get chizuk when they see that the Jewish people, that thousands, millions of Jews around the world can't enter Pesach. Their table doesn't look just joyous and complete and whole and regal, but there's an empty chair, there's a seat, because we can't fully experience our seder without them. So yeah, I would push about the hostages. I think. Right. I saw, again, we're apolitical up behind the Bima, but Donald Trump's criminal trial began, and there's no media in the courtroom, but they report and run out afterwards. Apparently, at like 2 trial sessions, he fell asleep.
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
He's tired. He's exhausted.
Yes, but he posted. He doesn't use Twitter. What does he use now? He posted on his other.
It's True Social.
Is that what it's called?
True or Truth?
I don't. Brody, do you have a account?
No.
You're not on there?
Do you have to pay for it?
I don't know, but he posted on Truth Social. I sent this to somebody who notoriously falls asleep every time I open my mouth to speak. Here, he posted on there, "I wasn't sleeping, comma, in capital letters, I was praying." I thought that's a good one.
It's like every drasha.
They could go with that, the people, the Shabbos Hagadol.
Right.
Hagadol, because it's a super long drasha.
There you go. That's your opening.
A lot of people will be able to afterwards say, "I wasn't sleeping. I was praying.
Right.
I was listening."
I always announce that in the shir I give on Rosh Hashanah afternoon. So, of course, a lot of people have the minhag not to sleep. So people are exhausted, and they come to the shir, and what's inevitably going to happen? They're going to sleep. So I said, I'm your cover. Because if you're going to sleep, at least sleep at a shir, right? And I was like, you made the effort. You get the effort for coming. I'm like, I am your cover. You've arrived. Now you can let your eyes close a little bit and let me soothe you to sleep.
Yeah.
Nice.
Let me ask you a question. The attacks that came in from Iran, we heard Motzei Shabbos. Did either of you find out before Shabbos ended?
Yeah.
And what was your reaction?
Well,
like what was going on?
If you came back to shul Shabbos afternoon, our security guards keep us posted on
it's on the other side of town.
What they think we need to know. Because remember, there was a lot of talk that Iran wasn't going to attack directly, neither direct from Iran directly to Israel. They were going to use a proxy and hit an Israeli embassy or a Jewish community or a shul. So like so many others, our security was on a little heightened alert. So the guards filled us in that, on the news that they had heard, which was that missiles were on their way, drones were on their way. And obviously we said Tehillim after Mincha. We said a few prakim of Tehillim and really tried to prepare ourselves to hear what was happening. Relieved after Havdalah to hear that it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And I don't think we begin to understand it yet. We will. Some say a miracle bigger than the 6-day war. The 300 missiles could come from so many directions, layered drones, ballistic, all kinds of missiles. And for them all to be shot down, it's unbelievable. Obviously, that young Druze girl who we pray for, the one injury, but it's mind-bogglingly miraculous.
I heard she's out of the hospital already.
Yeah? Oh, thank God.
Yeah. So
Okay.
there's almost nothing.
Thank God.
They said on the news, they were saying how to knock these rockets out with the Iron Dome, this is the guy that invented it. So it's not like someone commenting on what he did. He said it's the same thing as like if someone shoots a gun and the bullet's flying and then you try hit that bullet with another bullet. That's how hard it is. It's like you can't imagine. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'll take us into our pre-Pesach episode. What's your prediction this year? We've had years where the shul's packed, the whole world comes down to Florida. We've had years where we thought that was going to happen, but it's not as full as our members stayed and didn't go away. Let's get a prediction from each of you. This year, Pesach at Boca Raton Synagogue, Pesach in Florida. A lot of people going to Israel for Pesach.
Packed.
Do you think this is the year people are coming to Florida? I found in San Clements, a lot of people are staying back this year. They're staying home.
Yeah,
They're not leaving.
that's something. I think a lot of our members are staying. A, because Israel, not everyone's going to Israel, and B, because shortened Chol Hamoed. I mean, it's always the same amount, but because it's not a lot of weekdays. Why would you go to Mexico if it's all Yontif? So I think a lot of people are staying. Not there's anything wrong with Mexico. We love Mexico, but I think a lot of people are going to stay. My feeling is it's going to be crowded.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on that one. I think, first of all, I think almost everyone's moved to Florida, so I think everyone lives here now. There's no one left anywhere else.
Crowded. You're going with crowded.
I think it's going to be.
Now, someone made a comment. Are we the only? We give both first days full drushes, right? You're going to give a full drusha. I'm going to give a full drusha, and they're not excessively long, but they're not short either. Someone told me that the minhag in many shuls is that the rabbis don't speak on the first 2 days of Pesach.
Correct. I think most shuls the rabbis don't speak. I think many shuls in the New York area the rabbi's not there. Can't tell you how many rabbis I know who are going away because they say my shul empties out. There's no criticism or judgment of them. I kind of feel like a little bit with the ship and but the people who stay home also need a rabbi. In Florida, it's different. We describe that we get to be scholars and residents who sleep in our own beds because we look out and it's all these people we don't know, but we're able to stay home. I love being home. The truth is I love being home. I love being with my family and I love being with our shul family for Yom Tovim. So, but a lot of rabbis don't.
Interesting. The
first mornings, but why not? If people are in shul, why not have a Torah thought? Doesn't have to, like you said, doesn't have to be a Shabbos Haggadah drasha, but why not a thought? Eylon Levy, Jake Turx, two very different Jewish media personalities, but both worth listening to. I want to again, Eylon's new podcast, State of a Nation, really recommend it. He's had some great interviews. Find it, podcast players, listen, like, share. State of a Nation. Jake, you can read in Ami magazine. Ami magazine Pesach edition might have a little spread on Boca Raton, by the way. Just might. Don't tell Mishpacha. Might have a little spread on Boca Raton. So you can find Jake and Ami, Eylon Levy on his wonderful new podcast, State of a Nation. And we are honored to be able to have them both on. Wishing everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. Look forward to seeing you on the other side. Welcome, Eylon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to go behind the Bima. Since the beginning of this war, October 7th, we've been clinging, particularly those outside of Israel, obviously in Israel, living it in real time, but really clinging to the news and relying on spokespeople to tell us what's happening and advocate all of our collective interests. And you've been at the front line of that form of the war, the online war and the media war. For that, we are so incredibly grateful to you and grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbanim. A great honor to join you.
So let's start with your first coming to Israel, right? You made Aliyah during a previous Gaza war to be able to enlist and to join and to fight. It must be particularly poignant and powerful for you to have fought in a Gaza war on the ground and then to fight in a Gaza war on the air, on the air in the sense of the media and online and through traditional media. What does that mean to you? Tell us a little bit about that Aliyah. What moved you to leave Great Britain and to move to Israel and to really volunteer that service?
Well, I actually made Aliyah just after the end of the last Gaza war in 2014. The plane took off while the war was still raging, and it landed half an hour after the ceasefire came into effect. The following morning, I turned up at the enlistment bureau to sign up. I was sure that I'd flown into Israel to enlist during a war. Thankfully for everyone, that didn't happen because the war had already ended. But certainly mixed feelings knowing that I arrived in Israel just after a devastating Gaza war. We find ourselves in another one. And mixed feelings as well because my military service immediately after making Aliyah was in Kogat, the unit of the Israeli army that is responsible for Israel's humanitarian aid policy vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip. So one of the things that I was working on after the war was the question of the reconstruction of Gaza, how we get cement into Gaza while making sure that Hamas can't steal it and the UN can supervise it, how to give them more water, how to give them more electricity. The false conception we had was that if we could show Gazans that life was improving during times of not war, then they wouldn't want to declare war on us, that Hamas might be evil, psychopathic, anti-Semitic murderers. But if they see things are improving, then they will be deterred together with military strength. And all of that exploded on October 7th. We realized that Hamas wasn't interested in ruling Gaza after all. It wanted to lure us into a trap. And so when the war started, I had a lot of mixed feelings then about the military service that I had performed under the strategic assumptions that had unfortunately led our country to this catastrophe.
How would you compare your experiences fighting the offline war and then being in this army fighting this online war? What are the similarities? What are the differences in terms of the enemy? Because there are enemies who threaten us physically offline, your service. And now this experience online, some really hostile environments and interviews we've watched. We could talk about the meme that went viral of your eyebrows. Probably you never imagined you'd be known for your eyebrows, but the absurd question that was posed and reflection of the hostility that you faced and continue to face. What are some of the similarities? What are some of the differences between these two chapters of service that you've had for the people of Israel?
Look, the situation online on social media is awful. It's vile. We're getting slaughtered. Not only is this David against Goliath, but we're fighting on a battlefield that prioritizes Goliath. Because if these platforms prioritize virality, it means they promote things that are already popular. And so if you have only 15 million Jews and not all of them are on our side, it's very difficult to make a message resonate and make a message cut through. Especially when you have going against you, not only Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, the international media who are willing to buy and replicate their lies at the cost of human lives, a whole chorus of UN agencies and an alphabet soup of so-called human rights organizations that amplify Hamas's lies. And that means that when you fight for Israel, you get subjected to a lot of hate and vitriol. And you have to develop a thick skin and say, you know what, as long as I'm in Israel, I'm safe. They can't get to me. They can say whatever they want, but we have to keep fighting the good fight because the cost of not winning this war or of this war ending with Israel's reputation in tatters is too much to bear. And that's why, even though I'm no longer in an official capacity as an Israeli government spokesman, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a change of phase, and we'll continue doing the same work with interviews, with briefings, with social media to keep telling Israel's story around the world because it has to be told. There is a difference between social media and traditional media. In traditional media, you are forced to confront a journalist. You have to respond much more quickly than social media, where you can take as long as you want to respond to a particular tweet. And part of what we've been trying to do in this war is to adapt to the different battlefields. You know, there are media interviews, there are press conferences, there's social media, and within social media, there's Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and LinkedIn, and they're all very, very different platforms. You need to try to adapt yourself to each one.
What do you, in the current war, what do you think Israel has done well in that battle on social media, TikTok and Instagram? And what do you wish they could be doing better?
I think that Israel's response in the public diplomacy war has been far better than in previous rounds. As soon as the war began, the IDF spokesperson's unit enlisted hundreds of reservists. They're putting out information in a timely manner, infographics, videos, The foreign ministry as well is extremely active on Twitter as well and on Instagram. They're getting information out there, and we've been working with much greater coordination than I think we've seen in previous rounds. And I think we've won a certain number of points. I think, for example, we've won the point that Israel can no longer be expected to live next to Hamas. World leaders said that very clearly at the beginning of this war. Israel cannot tolerate the Hamas terrorist regime as its neighbor. The problem is they're now tying themselves into knots, trying to explain how Israel can stop having Hamas as a neighbor without the continuation of a war that they want to see stop. David Cameron, for example, the British Foreign Secretary, wrote a column the other week that was astonishingly pro-Israel, if you read it closely. He said in as many words, Israel can't be expected to live next to Hamas. Anyone calling for a ceasefire and just hoping it will stick is not addressing the cause of the conflict, which is Hamas's rule of Gaza. And Israel can't be expected to live next to that. Now, he hopes there will be a diplomatic dialogue that will see Hamas agree to dissolve itself. We're more skeptical about the prospects for that and think we're going to have to fight with real bullets, not magic bullets. But on that point, that this isn't another round, that this isn't going to end with a bit of tit for tat and then, okay, Israelis, you've had your fun. It's time to return to the status quo ante. We've won. But challenging a whole mechanism of UN organizations and agencies is an enormous challenge, because when the UN coordinator for ABCD are telling you that Israel is restricting aid, good luck when all you have on your side is the facts.
Does Israel's Hasbara machine, or at least you, we could ask you directly, are there targeted attempts at education? You take someone like Joe Rogan, most popular podcast on the planet. More people listen a day to Joe Rogan than most countries have people. And yet he's invoked the genocide trope clearly out of ignorance. He was educated on one of his episodes recently, although I don't know if that successfully turned him around or not. Yeah. So is there a targeted effort to reach out to the people who have the biggest platforms and the most influence? Because if they can get it right, that'll trickle down.
I would love to appear on Joe Rogan's podcast, and if he is watching Behind the Bima, then take this as an invitation to fly out to your studio at a time of your choosing. I think that in this war, we've been very good at social media, at least much better than in the past. Traditional media, there was a point at the peak of the war when, as a spokesperson's team, together with Ambassador Mark Regev and Tal Heinrich and Avi Hyman, we were doing maybe 30 interviews a day. Press conferences as well that got picked up live by BBC, Sky News, and the others. But suddenly we're seeing the information landscape evolving into places that perhaps we'd underestimated their importance. Podcasts, for example, I've been doing a ton of podcasts, haven't quite been able to book myself onto the major big league ones. Twitter Spaces are where people are getting their information from. People are getting their information from the chats during gaming as well, which isn't a market that we've penetrated at all. It's where a lot of the young people are getting their information. And I hope that when this ends, there'll be a serious think about how we pivot towards those new platforms as well. But it's a manpower question. It's a manpower question about how many interviews a team of spokespeople who, let's remember, were not in place before this war started, right, are not officially appointed civil servants, came together as part of the emergency mobilization of civil society and the diaspora after October 7th, just how much they can physically do.
Yeah, I think it's also important, sort of as the AIPAC model and politically, that you need to make those friends and keep them close before the time of crisis so they're in place. Maybe, like you say, some of these influencers and the more popular podcasters and the places and platforms that are disseminating information, we shouldn't be waiting for a crisis or a war or a flare-up. If we can keep them close and connected and informed and educated even before, hopefully they'll be more eager and open to representing the truth. Rabbi Moskowitz.
No, I just wanted to pick up on something you said.
We were caught with our pants down. I mean, the army has a weighty public diplomacy, spokesperson's office in place. The foreign ministry has all its embassies. But the core of the state under the prime minister's office, the infrastructure simply did not exist there at the beginning of the war. Those long-term relationships that should have been sustained were not there. And one of the things that I want to do with my team now is to do a serious lessons learned process where we look back and think, okay, what did the state do right? What did the state do wrong? And what would a proper crisis communications effort look like in anticipation of the next war? Lo aleinu, may we have peace.
Amen.
I want to pick up on one word that you said a few minutes ago, which was young people, 2 words. Obviously, with the impact and the effect of TikTok and Instagram, and that so many people, as you said, are consuming news, not through the New York Times, not through the Wall Street Journal, not through CNN or Fox News, but they're getting it through gaming. They're getting it through these little micro videos that show, horrific videos of Palestinians. There's a lot of good news in America. The good news in America is, by and large, Israel enjoys an enormous amount of support, both within the American public and within the halls of Congress. The challenging news is that there's a huge generational gap in those numbers. And specifically when you get to a younger population who are getting their news from these non-traditional sources, they're getting the wrong piece of information. Do you worry about that longitudinally? In other words, over the next, not just now, but over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that as this generation of young people grow up, they're growing up with misinformation. And how do we get to them and educate them before they're in the halls of Congress and before they're the next Joe Rogans who have been educated through TikTok?
Absolutely. This is a serious strategic problem for Israel and the Jewish people, because one of the biggest predictors of whether you're going to be in support of Israel or Hamas is not age or gender or race. It's age. Sorry, it's not race or gender or class. It's age. You see that very clearly in every Harvard-Harris poll showing who do you support, Israel or Hamas. And Congressman Torres, one of our greatest friends, made this point in the episode of the podcast that I filmed with him, of the State of a Nation podcast, in his office in the Bronx during a recent Hasbara tour of New York. But the main problem is age. And it's the consequence of years of indoctrination in universities and a long cultural shift. Now, is there a possibility that as people get older, they become more conservative, so to speak? They drop their more radical opinions. They adjust more towards the real world. Yes, that happens in many other cases. People go through a phase when they're students, when they're radicals, and think that burning everything down is cool, and then they meet the real world. But it's not a good starting position to be dealing with when America's youth are split 50-50 between Israel and the family-burning, gang-raping terrorists of Hamas. And this is where it's so important that we have the involvement of the diaspora, and why I see my role in this new effort that we're setting up as being to reach out directly to the diaspora. Before, I was speaking as a government spokesperson to journalists. Now I'm back in a civil society capacity, reaching out to the Jewish world as well. We have matching funding from the diaspora ministry as against, for a certain amount, as against funding that we are able to crowd fund for this new initiative called New Israeli Discourse, taking the team who've been working with me since the beginning of the war, most of them unpaid volunteers, and trying to make information accessible to the diaspora, but also give them a kick up the backside, because the situation is appalling. And when I was in the US just now speaking to people, I realized that it's so much worse than I had realized. I don't want to be alarmist, but I think it's fair to say that the golden age of American Jewry is over. I haven't spoken to anyone who's more optimistic in thinking that actually this problem is going to go away and things will revert to type. They won't. Maybe this is history reverting to type. When you have mobs marching through campuses chanting, globalize the intifada, students feeling abandoned and betrayed by their faculty and by their academics as well. The situation is deeply disturbing. And in order to reach the young generation, it's not enough for me to be in a suit and tie standing in front of a podium and a flag. We need people to fight. We need the kids who are scared to go on campus because there's a pro-Hamas protest. at a time that kids their age are literally in a tank fighting Hamas in Gaza. We need you to go to college. We need you to fight. We need you to put up hostage posters. When they tear them down, put up 2. When they tear down 2, put up 4. Build alliances with other minority groups on campus, whether it's Hindus or Christians or I don't know who. Get them to join you on putting up hostage posters. Show solidarity. Show that you're not alone. And part of what I've been trying to do is not only to make that information accessible, but to give the youth a kick up the backside. I was in the States just now to take part of the Hillel International Israel Summit in Atlanta, Georgia. And I gave a speech about what it means to make Gen Z Gen Zionist. I said being a Zionist has always been about standing up to the bullies. You don't let anyone push you around. You don't let them call you names. And in previous generations, Jews have always stood up to the bullies, even when the odds were stacked against them more than the TikTok algorithm is stacked against you now, I told them. And we need you to fight. And if you want to make Aliyah, come to Israel. Believe me, it's amazing to live next to the beach and swim in the Mediterranean on a Tuesday afternoon. But if you want to stay in America, there is nothing more Zionist and nothing more Jewish than to stand your ground, stand up and be counted, and fight for your place. We need you to make the world safe for Israel so that Israel can make the world safe for the Jewish people.
In so many ways, the young people are the source of hopelessness because they get it so wrong. But on the other hand, like you're describing, they're also very possibly the solution. In a recent interview that you did with Times of Israel, you said it's only in the startup nation that someone can go in 3 days from giving interviews in their living room to standing behind a lectern saying Prime Minister's office. And you said, I think one of the incredible things about Israel is the cultural tendency to take young people, give them an insane amount of responsibility, trust them, and say, run with it, all of which happened. So what you're describing is possible. It's the young people who can run with it. That's the startup nation of Israel, and that's the startup Jewish mentality wherever they are. But let's talk about you a little bit with that reflection in terms of the fact that you were not necessarily on a trajectory towards this career. And I'm wondering what you thought you were going to go into, what you thought you were going to do and be. I know that when you were young, when you were 14, you were on the debate club. Being on the debate club, did that prepare you to debate with the BBC and with the media? Was the debate club really actually planting the seeds for the career that you would have in debating others and representing? What did you think you were going to do? How did you end up here, and where are you going from here?
Without a doubt, the best training that I have ever received for media is debating. And I say this to all Jewish parents who ask, how do we raise the next generation of Israel advocates? 1, make sure their connection to the Jewish community and Israel is something they feel in their kishkas. And 2, send them to debate club. You don't have to feed them fact sheets about what happened in 1948 and what happened in 1967. Teach them to stand on their feet and argue. Because in debating, you get given an issue you know nothing about, or you know everything about it, but you are on the other side and you have 15 minutes to come up with the most convincing, barnstorming speech you can do, and to think on your feet and argue and stand your ground. And we need more Jewish students to do that, whether it's in their Hillels or whether it's within the broader university campuses. The problem isn't that they don't know about Israel. It's that they don't have the skills to stand up and argue. Look, I did have a certain thought growing up about doing something similar and being a spokesperson for Israel. Mark Regev was Mori V'Rabbi, really an inspiration growing up, because I would see him on TV defending Israel against hostile media interviewers. And over the last few months, he's been my mentor as well. It's just a shame that it had to happen in such horrific circumstances. Obviously, being a spokesperson in a war is not something that anyone wants, because we don't want war.
Where do you go from here? The podcast now, you've pivoted to it. I know it's got a big following. It's growing. State of a Nation. What's your goal with State of a Nation? Who are you hoping will be the listener, and what are you hoping they take away from it?
We have managed in about a dozen episodes since launching to get around 20,000 subscribers on YouTube, over 250,000 views on YouTube alone. The idea is Jews and supporters of Israel around the world are hungry for information, so that they can defend Israel. How do I know what to go on TV when I do an interview? As a government spokesman, as an ex-government spokesman, it's because I have in-depth conversations with the people who know what they're talking about. So we built a TV studio. It looks like a talk show where I can sit down with policy experts and journalists and writers and policymakers and pick their brains about what the information is so that I am better prepared going into the next interview. And so we are inviting viewers to join and be a fly on the wall so that they can leave the episode saying, wow, I think I really understand that issue much better. I have the information that I need to go out and fight Israel's case. We're planning a bunch of other initiatives to try to continue getting the message directly to the world. One of the amazing things the internet has done, if you put aside the bots and the trolls and how easy it is to spread fake news, it's the democratization of information. It's maybe made it more difficult to get accurate information out because there's so much bad information, but it's created new channels for non-governmental actors to get information out to the masses. And we're focusing now, really at the moment, to be honest, not thinking far beyond the end of this war because we don't know how long this war is going to last. We know that hostages are still trapped there and all the awful things that are being done to them. We're still stuck fighting Hamas. As we record this, the country is on tenterhooks because there are reports of a potentially imminent Iranian missile strike on the country. We don't know whether this is going to wrap up in 2 weeks or escalate into something much bigger and longer and deadlier. But hopefully we're going to build the infrastructure here that will not only help us fight the information war, but create the foundations for something going forward to do in Hebrew they call it mabam, the malcha ben milchamot, the campaigns between the wars. And that's something we'll be able to do here as well, so that hopefully we don't enter the next war completely unprepared.
You had mentioned the trolls and the bots. I would imagine the position that you held and the position that you're putting yourself in earns you not so many friends in the international world. Let's just put it nicely like that. And as you said, while you're safe in Israel, I would imagine it's challenging when you travel around, certainly the public face that you played. What do you need all this for? You could sit in your home. There are plenty of Jews around the world that have chosen to sit on the sidelines. You have put yourself front and center as the face for many people around the world of Israel advocacy. Why do you need that headache?
If we don't win this war, we're all going to die. We don't have a choice. There simply is no way that I can say, you know what? Let Hamas convince the world that Israel is guilty of genocide. Let it convince the world that we're committing acts of rape in hospitals and deliberately starving the Palestinian population and committing war crimes on a mass scale. It's not going to affect me. Of course it's going to affect me. Put aside lofty national interests. Me personally, what is the world going to look like for me personally as a Jew in a world that has turned against Israel? Do you think it'll be a friendly place for me, even if I'm not a face of everything that has been happening now? We are at a critical inflection point in Jewish history right now, where either we mobilize the whole free world behind us to fight the forces of barbarism and support our democracy and liberal values, or the free world is going to fall down an anti-Semitic rabbit hole. And with the rise of China and Russia, declining American power, rising anti-Semitism in the United States, that is a recipe for a bleak solution, a bleak future for the Jewish people. You know, there's the movie The Day After Tomorrow about a sudden climate crisis, and it ends in a very strange way where suddenly the storm stops and everything reverts back to normal. That's not going to happen here. There is no way to hope that the storm will simply pass you by if you keep your head down. It will come and it will get you. It will come and it will get you, and there will be nowhere to hide if the world is convinced that Israel is essentially the reincarnation of Nazi Germany. And that's why we need everyone to fight, including the cowardly celebrities who are afraid of career suicide if they stick their necks out, because they're going to come for you too. It'll take a year, it'll take 5, it'll take 10, but you will be guilty by association simply for being a Jew, and they will force you underground. And I don't want to live in a world like that. I don't think any Jews do.
Yeah, they've been very disappointing, these celebrities. How do you prepare for an interview when you know that you're going to appear for 5 minutes? Are you practicing sound bites? I know in the media world, you don't have long form conversations. I mean, the beauty of your podcast, and in some ways, you've been liberated from the constraints of both being a government spokesperson and the limited soundbite world where you could have long form conversation on podcasts. How do you perform when you do appear, though, on American cable news or British cable news? Are you preparing sound bites that no matter what they ask, here's what I want to say, really, regardless of what they ask? Or are you just going to wing it based on when they ask, you have the information, you'll see how it's going to flow? Is your goal to educate, to advocate? Are you trying to turn the minds of the extremes, or are they hopeless and you're just trying to get the people on the fence? What goes through your mind when you get the call, Eylon, can we get you for 5 minutes on the BBC?
That was around 20 questions there.
Yeah.
It's a rabbi. That's what we do.
You can't just wing it. You prepare sound bites, main points. Sometimes it's an interactive process where I'll finish an interview, upload the clip onto Twitter, and then in order to shrink it down to Twitter size, I find the most succinct way of saying it, and then I say, that's the soundbite. And then that's the phrase I'll repeat in the next interview because I've had some time afterwards to internalize and think about it. One critical thing is tailoring yourself to each country. It's not easy. It's why it's good that I have a team helping me as well. If I'm going and giving an interview for India, I need to know what the Indian Prime Minister has been saying lately, because I can't assume that the Indian public knows what the British public know, or certainly not what the Israeli public knows. So you have to go in prepared. You can't go in with a script in your head, because if you go with the same spiel, no matter what the question is, they will know that you're trying to exploit them and not actually answer the question. You have to answer the question, but you stick to the core phrases. You stick to the main lines. You try to think of the simplest way to distill the facts.
And do you match them? Meaning, if somebody's intense, is it helpful to be dramatic and escalate, or is there a value to staying calm throughout and just making the persuasive argument? Is there a training, or is there exercises you're doing as you're getting ready to go on and for that interview to stay? Again, the perfect example is that viral meme, the eyebrow episode, which is the least thing you should ever be known for, but part of what made you famous. And I imagine that was not premeditated, because you never could have anticipated such an absurd question as what she said. Is the value of the Palestinian life only a third of a Jewish life? That's why so few hostages for so many prisoners. And your reaction in real time helped actually get that clip out and your answer to it. Did you realize while it was happening that your reaction was an outlier, or was just that spontaneous and it just happened?
That reaction was not premeditated, but it was conscious. As Kay Burley was asking that question, I found myself asking, where is she going with this question? No, she's not. Yes, she is. Okay, here's a moment of TV gold. You have to do something. And I remember telling myself on the count of 3, pull a face. 1, 2, 3, now. And I told myself, hold the expression.
Wow.
And off the interview, I cut it and I realized that this would do well on social media. Did I expect that it would catapult me to the kind of like pop culture icon that has somehow happened in the last few months? Absolutely no. Absolutely not. I'm going to have to hop off after just another question, okay?
Sure.
If we can try to wrap up.
I'll find it. I'll ask the following. I'm
Sure.
assuming that because you're excellent at media, nothing is accidental on this interview, including your backdrop. And I'm noticing a lot of books in the backdrop. I see a Bibi autobiography, David Cameron. I see the Menachem Begin by Danny Gordis. I see a lot of Abba Eban books. I see Ally by Michael Oren. If you had to distill that down to 2 books that you would recommend, 1 or 2 books that you would recommend all of our listeners has to read in order to better understand how we got here, where we are and where we are going, what would those books be and why?
You're right to notice that nothing is accidental, and I have embedded a lot of subliminal messaging into the background behind me. You notice just behind my ear, there's a book that says, Trust.
Yes.
Not a coincidence. And if you look over here, the books spell out a coherent narrative. Who betrayed the Jews? The world. Can the whole world be wrong? People love dead Jews. A history of delusions. WTF.
Wow.
None of that is
So which books do you recommend if you want our listeners to go get some books and read them? In addition to using their bookcases to communicate their feelings.
there are a lot of outstanding books. One that I think I can spot behind me, Yossi Klein Halevi's Like Dreamers, a deeply moving book about the liberation of Jerusalem in 1967 that brings together the complexities of Israeli society and tells not only the story of the geopolitics of what happened, but also the rich cultural mosaic of this country, and gives it that nuance that is so often missing.
Amazing. Eylon, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all you do. We should have success in continuing to spread the message of light. The light should dispel the darkness. And please, God, next time we speak, it should be to mark a Israeli victory and the return of our hostages home.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's hope the hostages get back by the time you launch this episode, and we can set about the important task of rebuilding our country and rebuilding our people.
Amen. Welcome behind the Bima, Jake Turx, the great Jake Turx, Senior White House Correspondent, Chief Political Correspondent for Ami magazine, and wouldn't necessarily picture a Hasidic Yid having those titles and those roles. And yet, Jake, here you are. Many iconic images of you in the press room, some of the questions you've asked over the last few years. You and I have been privileged to meet in some amazing places together, and it's great to be behind the Bima. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very so much for having me. The long title you gave for me, I'm very much appreciating it. But don't ask me how to spell it, because
there you go.
That's great.
So there's two Jake Turx, right? There's I suspect that at your bris milah they didn't say Yikarei Shemo B'Yisrael Jake.
Yeah, I think Dr. Jekyll was once asked the same question, and he said he was by the bris was Mr. Hyde.
There you go. So what's the Yiddish numen? How are you know? Rabbi Yankov.
Avram Yankov.
Avram Yankov.
I call him by his name.
So how did Avram Yankov become Jake? How did a Hasidic Yid? Tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and how you end up having press credentials sitting in the press room of the White House.
I'm kind of picturing myself sitting here as a kid watching this show, waiting like, what's he gonna say? Like how did he get there? How was my future self, a Hasidic kid from Borough Park, going to end up in the White House? And what's press credentials? And like, what's a journalist? We didn't even know what journalists were.
You couldn't spell credentials.
No, for sure. Listen, I was born in Borough Park. I went to Baba V'Chaida. And if that wasn't good enough, I was kicked out of class every day. So it's not like I even gave the system a chance. Wow. You know what I'm saying? Like, the system's like, hey, maybe we could have made it work, but like, you were never present. What are we going to do? I'm sorry, you know? So I can't even blame the system at all.
I wonder, there's probably a kid right now watching that's in the same circumstance, just kicked out of school. And he's like, you know what? Now I know what I can do. I can go work at the White House.
There you go.
Yeah, imagine if it was kicked out for having internet to watch your show.
Right.
Could be. It could be. So tell us, what was the trajectory? What happened? So you didn't fit into the system, or you didn't give the system the chance. That's right. Your background.
So that in a way defined me, because I had this, like, if I felt a teacher was doing something hypocritical or whatever wrong, like I would say it, and I was never scared. And I knew, and this is back when they used to throw petch from all sides. So like, I kind of had this propensity towards asking questions of people in authority, even if it came at the expense of my personal comfort. And obviously I don't recommend it, because I lost out a lot on my formal years of education. So as you could probably tell from, but I was always very curious. I was always naturally drawn to wanting to find out how things worked, wanting to understand things. And so when I would get kicked out of class, I would go to the school library and I would read whatever few books they had. I would just read a lot. And my mother was a librarian, so she brought home books all the time, like, you know, the Curious George, Berenstain Beer type books. So like, I love to learn more things, but I didn't appreciate the classroom setting in which it was in. now as an adult, understanding that ADHD is more than just a punchline to a joke about squirrels. It's you know, the generation that tried to teach me wasn't as informed about different kinds of behavioral issues that children, especially children from large families, sometimes end up having to deal with. And today, most of us are much better equipped to dealing with these kinds of things. But back then, you're the troublemaker, you're the kid who's the oy bechuchim, and you know, I don't want to deal with you. Let the principal babysit you for the next day or two.
So some people rebel. Some people with that background who don't fit into the system, they rebel by leaving the system, by dropping Yiddishkeit or Torah or halachic way of life, an observant way of life. You rebelled by going to the White House.
I rebelled by working within the system to try to improve the system, which sounds very cliche, and it is actually. I'm sorry, that's what it was. So I became an English teacher. When I got married, I was like 20, became an English teacher, and I did it for a decade. I loved it. Even when I was in 8th grade and I was out of English, I would kind of work as a substitute teacher's assistant. Wow. And, my parents were in chinuch, my grandparents, it's one of those beautiful blessings in life. And so that, in a way, I was teaching junior high, and then I started teaching high school as well. And you really got to know what you're teaching, because the kids are going to call you out. They're going to, kids are merciless. So I had to learn how to spell things. I had to learn the rules of grammar. I had to learn how to express myself in a way that I could then give over to them. And I loved it. It was great. Like Rabbeinu HaKadosh says, I learned from my students more than from my masters. It was literally that.
So how do you go from being the English teacher in the classroom to journalism?
So I always had this natural inclination towards questioning that which you're not allowed to question. And I did it with Limudei Kodesh stuff, it was something about the Gemara that didn't make sense to me. I would ask the question, even if I knew. Rabbi Daniel Mechanic, he's amazing. He's phenomenal in what he does. And so he came to speak to us I was in Tel Yeshiva, Chicago at the time. And he did a whole thing, and he was challenging the Olim to ask him questions. And no one had the guts. And I was the only guy. I would get up and I would keep asking him questions, because I had a lot of questions, and I never had an opportunity to ask these questions of someone like him.
Right.
So I didn't want to let the opportunity go to waste. So I was asking him all these questions. And, of course, he dealt with me like that. That wasn't a big challenge for him.
Right.
But for me, it took courage. And then everybody like getting those looks and hisses and ooh, I kind of knew to expect it already by then. But at the same time, if I felt that a teacher had made a promise and didn't keep their promise, I would call them out on that too. It wasn't just I was a rebel against anything that I perceived as not making sense. And I found that in the system a lot.
And you're a great example of somebody taking what could be a negative quality, but channeling it for the good, in that you've now used it to challenge the system and ask questions and leave your comfort zone in an uncomfortable setting. So tells Yeshiva doesn't have a school newspaper. What was the first, how did you start, writing and being a journalist and credentials? And
so the first time I started writing was Camp Bunim, the Camp Bunim newsletter, their first year. Camp Bunim, a sleepaway camp in the mountains. And by mountains, I mean the Catskill Mountains. I know you have an international audience. So there are these, basically you go to sleepaway camp, and they were new camp. There were certain things that hadn't been taken into account before the year started, which one of them being who's going to write the camp newsletter. They didn't have someone to do the camp newsletter. So I was like, hey, I'll do it. Not that I knew anything about camp newsletters. I knew how to use Microsoft Word and, some basic programs a little bit, but I was good at making fun of people. So if I didn't like if the league captain did something that bothered me, I'd make a few jokes about him, and I'm like, why don't they just write it up, and why didn't I get the camp to provide a computer for me, and then I'll just do it. So that's exactly what happened. I got my computer, and I was just making these jokes about people, and I knew I wasn't a writer because I didn't learn formally how to write, but I knew how to tell over a story. And so I would just write it exactly this, using the same words that I would use in verbal communication. And then when I was teaching high school, and we were doing the task program, which is their GED equivalent. And one of the things you got to do is you got to take these kids, some of whom have had nothing beyond a fourth grade education, and you got to, within 2 years, bring them up to the point where they could take the 7.5-hour test, including writing a persuasive essay and an explanatory essay. So I was like, get up there, say a story. The guy says a story, but like something that happened, like a personal story. Tell me about a time you witnessed a car accident. So they'll describe it, and they'll describe it in vivid detail, and they will be mostly grammatically correct. Like the sentences will end at the point where the sentence is supposed to end, and then when you want to ask a question, it'll be a question mark at the end, right? So when people speak, they already naturally know the basic structure of a sentence, a paragraph, a story. But when they sit down and they say, oh, now I have to become a writer. Let's see, once upon a time, right. Where do I go from here? No, just tell the story, right? And so we were able to bypass so many of the hangups that kids have when you got to memorize nouns, verbs, adjectives, subjects, predicates. Because like, I'm already learning 18 hours of Limudei Kodesh. I'm not interested in memorizing these vague concepts. But if you listen to how people naturally speak, their sentences will have a subject and a predicate. They don't have to know that. That's just how we communicate, right? So that kind of got me into exploring different writing styles and short story stuff and jokes. I was writing a lot of jokes on Twitter back then.
Were you at AMI first, or were you in the White House first?
No, the White House was I was with AMI the first year, the year they opened.
Oh,
yeah.
Are you nervous as a writer for AMI, where you're saying, I got to be honest, I want to just tell people what I'm feeling or what I see, but they're not going to publish it? Is the camp not going to publish it when you want to write about the basketball team?
Are you kidding? I'm nervous now talking to you guys. Yeah, of course I can't write like just what I want to write. No way. You got to be sensitive to. I'm saying, let's say I believe something is true, and I know it's going to hurt somebody's feelings.
Right. Then you're not going to write that.
Very simple, right? So now I have to think: should I write the story anyway and then change the guy's name, or should I just not write the story at all, or should I ask the guy and try to like ease him into it, or should I just not say anything and assume he's not going to read it, because why would he? I mean, you got to ask yourself these questions, and this is just on a basic Ben Adam Lachaveri level, right? So if you don't want to hurt people's feelings, you definitely don't want to offend them. And there are topics that are going to offend people and hurt them in a way that is not constructive, that is counterproductive. So let's say it's something we both agree on. Let's say we both agree on a certain, like Klal Yisrael is doing something wrong and it has to be brought to their attention, right? We could all agree that I would not be the right person to do that. There are people who are supposed to do these things. The Rabbanim, the Gedolim, right? So even if we all agree that this is a subject that has to be brought to the front and center, I'm not the guy to do it. So I'm not looking to cover things that would be considered controversial in the sense that I would do it against the system, but I wouldn't do it against individuals in a way that it would hurt them. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Let's fast forward to today. Right. You're very outwardly, your appearance obviously reflects your being a Torah observant Jew, a proud Jew, practicing Jew. Have you experienced anti-Semitism in the press room, in the press corps? Are there people who've been rude or hold it against you, or protesters about Gaza? How have you navigated your very public Jewish identity with your career?
It's very interesting. I have felt certain tensions, let's say, that I wouldn't say I felt previously. Or if I felt it during the Trump years, I would have probably attributed it more to just the chaos of the Trump years more than anything personal. But people do seem a little bit on edge, even when not discussing this topic. And it usually becomes apparent that somehow this topic is related to it. At the same time, I do have strong empathy towards what the Palestinian people in their world, from their point, their whole worldview, they are definitely suffering. And I'm not saying that it's not their fault or it is their fault. I'm not differentiating whether they did vote for Hamas 20 years ago or they didn't vote for Hamas, or if they don't have voting rights at all over there. But just to understand them on a basic human level. So, if someone's in pain, don't argue with him. Don't try to tell him that what he's going through is not real, or that what he's going through is so easily solvable. Just one person has to pick up the phone and say, "Here are the Jewish children back. We're sorry." They don't want to hear that because they're suffering right now, and they created this intricate world. Just it is such a fascinating world that to them that is the entire world. That's all they know.
Right.
And in that world, we are the bad guys. And not because they necessarily hate Jews. They feel that they have been wronged by a group of people. It's not about the title. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't let out their anger on Jews in Belgium or Canada or anywhere else.
Mm.
They might, but the root of it is not inherently anti-Semitic.
But you haven't had in the press room, you haven't had, let's say, the correspondents of other major networks who will come over to you and say, "Hey, you're the Jew. Look at you dressed and Jew. What do you think, or how do you feel, or what has your experience been like in the press room?"
Yeah, no, I mean, we're working with very professional people. They're not just going to lose themselves in the moment like that, especially when I'm not provoking them. No one's provoking them.
You have good relationships with them when the cameras are off and nobody's fighting who's getting called on next?
Yeah, I try. Try to hold doors open and invite people for coffee. Just be a mensch. Put on deodorant before going to work. You know what I'm saying?
I heard the history of the press room was that whoever's giving the press conference not allowed to leave until they answer all the questions. It's clearly not the case now.
Never. No.
Okay, so how do you get called on, and how often do you get called on, and what's the procedure for getting called on?
So every press secretary has their own method. The Trump press secretaries were more open to the little guy, the outlet that wouldn't necessarily get that kind of exposure by other press secretaries. And it did create friction with the big networks because obviously they hated that because there would be days that CNN wouldn't get called on, and CNN will go nuts, and other big networks will go nuts. And when you see a guy from a little network, but if that looks weird and whatever, let's call it what it is, then they get resentful. Like, why is this guy getting questioned and I'm like this major guy and no one's looking at me?
Did they ever say to you, "Listen, I got a question, but they're not going to call on me, so can you ask my question"? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, we had that a lot during COVID because we had to do rotations. So, like, there was a point when I was only getting a seat once every few weeks because, you have the TV rotation, you have the wire rotation, the TV rotation, and the print rotation. The print rotation is the largest. So we had 8 seats, and in a rotation of, because print includes news websites also. So the New York Times is print, but Huffington Post is also print, and
I didn't
Breitbart.
realize that. So what we see on the news on Fox News or CNN, that's not the print edition of there's a separate press conference for that group.
So that's actually a great question. So some outlets do have two. They do have 2 spots because they created 2 separate entities, like Fox and Fox Radio operate as 2 separate entities, but they don't have Fox Online. Newsmax has one seat, but they share it between their TV edition and the print edition, or the TV edition and their online edition. They rotate.
Every press conference you go to, you're prepared with a question in case you get called on?
You got to be prepared, and it's so much harder than it sounds, because you gotta know the story. If it's a breaking story, which it usually is, you gotta get the words right, and you don't have a lot of time to figure it out. It could be in an industry that you're entirely unfamiliar with. Well, you have very few minutes to get yourself, and you also have to be confident that you got the right words, right? Then there is, you're always concerned someone else might ask the question before you need a backup question and then another question. And most of the time during the press conference, you think of something better to follow up on than what your question had actually been. So, but where you really have to be prepared is for those moments where you bump into the president in the hallway, which happens. It has happened. And you have 1 second to get his attention, to start asking a question in such a way that he wants to stop and listen. If he stops, then his whole procession stops and Secret Service doesn't say anything. But if he keeps walking, you just stay in one place. You don't follow him. And that's how, and not only the president, I bumped into the vice president, Secretary of State, like cabinet level officials in the hallway. You got to have the right question for them.
And I imagine, Jake, that your question almost every time is not about the economy or healthcare or immigration. Is it always about Israel or the Jewish community or anti-Semitism, or you are asking about those other things?
No, the opposite. It is about the economy. It is about immigration. It is about healthcare. It is about the issues we care about, because we know that Hashem is going to take care of Israel one way or another. Whatever the government decides, the government is following a script. We're all following a script. We're just part of this interactive play that's playing out in real time that we're both participants and attendees of. And so ultimately, there are more important things to focus on in the bigger picture pre-October 7th, because now there are a lot of, there are moving pieces every day, and any decision the administration makes has a direct impact on people's lives in Eretz Yisrael. So obviously, this is a time for focus on that.
Because of your access, do you get phone calls from the heads of major Jewish organizations saying, "Listen, we could call the White House and ask the question, but you could put it on an international stage"? Do they tell you what to ask? Do you get questions all the time?
No, that would be inappropriate. And see, here's the thing: if you have an idea for a question, tell me. Let me hear. Sure, I'd love. I love when people send me questions, because A, makes my job a lot easier, but B, it gives me a sense of what people are interested in knowing. Now, sometimes these questions are highly technical, and it's like this guy had a problem with his Amazon account, and he thinks of the federal government. I'm like, okay, whatever. No, but maybe it's actually an important question. Maybe it's something that a lot of people deal with. I don't know.
Right.
But sometimes the person's living in his own bubble, and they think that this is like major important, and in their bubble it is. And I'm not taking that away from them. But ultimately, the more questions I get, the better sense I get of what people are interested in hearing. But for an organization to say, hey, why don't you ask this question? You could assume that the question is something that's self-serving to the organization. So right away, I'm already looking for, like, what's their angle here?
How has life changed for you since October 7th? Do you view your role not just to try to ask questions to report the news, but to use it to advocate? When I've watched, press briefings, it's very clear, both whether it's Peter Doocy, is he still doing a Fox News, or CNN's person, right? You know which network they're from because of the angle they're asking the question, and they clearly have an agenda. And you might agree with one agenda more than the other, but, and again, maybe last administration, this administration, they're trying to play catch-up. They're trying to help them explain themselves because they really want to help the world understand them. Do you come in with an agenda that you're not just there to report the news, but you're there to advocate? You represent, we're tiny people, and we don't have no one else in that press room, certainly for the Torah interests or angle, is going to advocate. So when you're thinking of that question or that interaction in the hallway, especially since October 7th, are you looking to not only get good news, but also to use it as an opportunity to influence?
What's rule number one? Do no harm. Rule number one for me is do no chil Hashem. That has to be rule number one. And most questions that I want to ask are questions that might not be, again, I might not be the right person for that kind of question. Let's say there's a scandal involving the son of the president or daughter of the president. Now, it's a very legitimate news story, but it's not something that my audience is very much interested in. We stay away from Lashon Hara. It's not our place. Not our place. It's something that journalists should talk about and should get to the bottom of. But for the one from Jew, this can't be my priority. And this is something that has to be consistent across administrations. Unless the president's son is acting in a way that's directly harming the community, or my audience more specifically, then it's not my problem. I'm sorry, not just not my problem. No, it's something I want to avoid.
But when you come in, let's say on the Israel side, will you ask questions that are also advocating? So you'll say, administration, can you defend that you are not holding Iran more accountable, or defend that at the UN you called for a ceasefire without making it conditional on the hostage release, or Mr. President or press secretary, there are American hostages. What are you doing to bring them home?
Yeah, so those are legitimate questions, and I've asked those questions. That's not advocacy. Advocacy would be like saying, you just pledged $16 billion, but don't you realize that's not enough? Send another $24 billion. That's advocacy. Asking about how do you justify funding UNRWA, which is something that I asked about, and something that they haven't been held enough to account for the money they poured into UNRWA, $1 billion in 3 years to UNRWA and other Palestinian agencies. And we know exactly where that money went. And we knew back then where it was going. And we tried warning them. And there were Republican Congress members that tried raising the alarm. And the administration just disregarded just everything. That is something that's a way that they should be held to account. That's something that they should have to answer for. And people should take responsibility for it and whatever consequences result from that.
Wow. I'm just wondering, when it comes to the protocol for asking questions, sometimes you'll notice people ask, it seems like one question, which seems appropriate. And then sometimes people say, I've got 3 questions, and they just rattle off 3. Is that allowed? Because I'm like wondering where, and the 3 totally, it's not a follow-up from the first question. It's 3 totally different questions.
Right. So it goes back to the first question that I think Rabbis Efrem asked a while back about how do you get the press secretary to call on you, or what's the protocol for that? And it really comes down to what your personal relationship is. Well, how badly they need your audience, but also what your personal relationship is. And if you're a mensch behind the scenes and you're just trying to do your job and you're just being professional, they have no reason not to work with you. A lot of the right-wing reporters that have complained either publicly or privately because they haven't been called on across very long stretches of time, like I'll go over to them and say, when's the last time you went over to the press secretary, just whatever in the morning, and say, hey, just good morning, checking in, saying hi, just how you feeling, how you doing? They're like, no, I never talked to her, out of the briefing room. So I'm like, shkoyach. So then, like, they don't even know who you are. They might know your name, but like, you don't have a relationship with them. Right. Why would she? Like, right. You didn't take a second to acknowledge her. Why would she acknowledge you? Not that it even has to work that way, but just, so. And then sometimes there are certain reporters that they try to avoid because they're already guessing that they might ask on a certain subject that they're looking to stay away from. And then other times it's kind of expected that you would call on a reporter who represents a certain audience on a certain type of occasion.
Rabbi Broide, you have a big question.
Yeah, so you're I don't know if it's your official title, but you're a chief political correspondent for Ami magazine, and I feel like in some ways I could potentially be a chief political correspondent for Behind the Bima, And if someone, another fellow yeshiva guy wants to go and just give it a shot in the press room, how do we apply? How do we get in there?
Broide wants to know how he can get some press credentials to the White House.
I've got questions also for these guys.
He wants to. His dream is to raise his hand and say, "Josh Broide, on behalf of Behind the Bima, I have a question."
Correct. What's the ticket?
Yeah. Right. Chief Political Correspondent was my former title. Senior White House Correspondent is my present title.
Oh, wow.
And somehow, let's just say I don't have editing access to my Wikipedia page. So it says both as if they're both current. That's the difference.
Okay.
And sometimes it gets picked up. Like sometimes outlets will describe me in an interview, or whatever, and they'll use the full thing. I'm like, you can't be both. That sounds very pretentious. Like,
right.
I'm just looking for either. I'm not so particular.
I've been the senior executive vice president for marketing, and also I'm in charge of the trucking department. Like, but what I'm saying? Like, please chill. Just.
How did you get the credentials?
Is there an interview?
Is it on Me Magazine? Was it you? Is there a reference from somebody that gets you the in? How does one?
Yeah.
Somebody's got a blog now. They can apply to be in the press room of the White House.
It's very, very tricky. There's no answer really. There's a congressional pass and a White House pass. The White House pass works for the White House. The congressional pass works for Congress and the White House and anywhere else in the country. But having the White House hard pass gets you certain privileges that having the congressional pass doesn't. So you want to have both essentially. But having a congressional pass makes it infinitely easier to be able to get a White House pass. Though it's not necessary because, like I said, there is no formal process. To get a congressional pass, there is a very defined process. It's a very long process, and most outlets don't end up even starting. Like, I sat down the first time I sat down with them. They're like, I said, so what's the first step of the process? Like, okay, here's this application, fill it out. Had a lot of questions about. A lot of them centered around the outlet's finances and stuff. They want to know, like, how much they're bringing from subscriptions, how much is store sales, how much is ads, who has stakes in the company. They want to know if there's anybody with an agenda. Because, imagine you're a big oil company, you'll pay a guy $100K to go down to Washington, get himself a press pass, and ask questions that are going to yield your bottom line millions of dollars in whatever kind of subsidies come as a result of, or whatever. So they take this very, very seriously. So the first time you sit down with them, like, fill out these forms and send us a few recent samples of your magazine, and then someone's going to get back to you in the next 4 to 6 months about the next step in the process. And then you're like, okay, and how long is the process? And they'll say, well, typically, on average, it takes about 2 years. It could take a little longer. And then most people who hear that are like, whatever,
2 years. Do you have to live in D.C. and be available every day? I'm saying Shabbos,
Yeah.
Let's say there's an important conference and you're not there. Is that a strike against you because you didn't show up?
So, yeah, no, that's a great question. I didn't realize that we're going to, like we'll have so much to talk about just about the day-to-day of the job.
A couple of ADD people here.
Yeah, see, now I forgot the question.
So did I.
Is it held against you, Shabbos, if you can't be available?
Right. No, but before that, there was more of a general.
He wanted to know, do you live in D.C.?
Oh, okay. Right. So it was more about how present you have to be. The answer is you don't have to live in D.C. so long as you live in either Maryland or Virginia. That's good enough. But you have to live in one of those three.
Wow.
And,
okay, so I'm out.
Yeah.
Jake? How was your family and how was your background, the Hasidus in general, received what you're doing? It's sort of out of the box. It's an outlier, maybe unprecedented. Are you ever, through your questions or support of Israel, accused of being a Zionist, which may not be consistent with your background? Or can you love the people of Israel and be concerned about the safety? Is it a complicated thing for you to navigate in that sense, given your family and your background?
Rabbi Broide, are you going to be upset if I answer Rabbi Goldberg's 4 questions before I get back to your 2 questions?
That's why we'll never get a press pass, by the way.
I mean,
Love it.
listen, if you're going to ask
Go
3
for it.
questions, ask 3 questions. Let me answer the first 2.
Go whatever order you want.
How did my community take it? You know how the Frum community is. We're our biggest fans and critics.
Right.
And if we don't like what someone's doing, we think someone is doing something better, could do something better. Or more importantly, if you feel you would do his job better than him, if you were there, then let me hear. Absolutely. Like, what does Ezu Chacham and Lamid Mikal Adam means? I mean, it means he who learns from everybody is wise, including and especially the people who come over to you unsolicited, true, but they have advice for you. And they're clearly passionate about what they want to tell you. So hear them out. Hear them out. You learn something. So yes, I've gotten criticism and I've learned from it. And they're usually right because, like, I don't see myself. And I'm not like an honest observer of myself. Like, I look at myself as, oh, I'm great, I'm awesome, I'm a celebrity. Wow, people come over to me, they say nice things, and then they say mean things, and it's part of life. But then you gotta stop for a second and say, I have an opportunity. I have an opportunity to become a better person.
Right.
So, like, these people are helping me. They're free therapy, and they're coming over to me. I don't have to even look for them. It's beautiful.
It's a good attitude.
It's not easy. I'm not like being flippant about it, but it's helpful. It's very helpful. Like, having this just mindset, it just makes it so much easier.
Wow. Does the magazine that you happen to represent at any given time, if you don't get a question in for a couple of weeks, do they come back to you and say, listen, we're paying you to get questions, you're not getting any questions? Is that looked at like you're not doing your job, or it's like you do your best and it's sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't?
Let me tell you something. Right now, I'm looking at a screen that says the word Ami Magazine on the screen.
Right.
And you guys have thousands of viewers, and they're going to see the words Ami Magazine on their screens. Ami is so thrilled. I provide so much more than they will ever realize or even deserve. And
great.
So I think they're grateful for whatever I bring in. At the same time, I'm happy. You know what? I have a tremendous appreciation for them because they took me in. I was 23 years old. I'd never written other than that camp newsletter. I'd never written before in my life. Like, I didn't even, like, in school, I didn't even write almost ever because I wasn't in class. And then in high school, I was a little more into it. And I had a few very good teachers and tells. But ultimately, whatever. Who cares?
Rabbi Avram Yankiv,
I love it.
keep making a Kiddush Hashem. We appreciate you representing our community in a place that, I don't know, historically, has there ever been another Frum member of the press corps of the White House who's been in the press room? Are you the first?
So for my mother, who's probably going to be watching this, Ma, I'm Frum. So thank you. Thank you.
Are you the first?
Am I the first? Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't judge people. Like I'm maybe someone in 1972, and I mean.
But so visibly with a yarmulke on, a kippah wearing, yarmulke wearing, observant Jew in the press room, standing up, raising his hand, asking a question.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we would probably know about that. I mean,
Right.
you would probably already know about that.
Right, so we don't. So
I don't know another one.
You got a big responsibility. It's a big stage.
No,
a lot of lights on you.
Yeah, but I'll tell you that there have been Frum reporters that have blazed the way. And Yochanan Dunn was writing for Hamadia back then. He's a pioneer. Hasidic guy wears a full levush. He was writing when I was I think before I got married, even he was already a published writer and a Stalin Chusid from Borough Park. There's this guy Granot who used to write for Mishpacha in Israel, and there was a point in his life where he adapted the Gera Hasidus garb, and he would visit Muslim countries and dress like a Chusid, and he inspired me. People like that like very often the first person to do something is the one who isn't noticed, but then the guy who kind of builds on what those people did, and then he kind of perfects it a little bit, that guy gets all the attention. But we're all standing on the backs of giants over here.
Wow.
Yeah, there's also social media has made a big difference also, because social media, the streaming of press of the press room and conferences, I think has made a big change. So Siyata Deshmaya, Hashem should help put the right words in your mouth and represent us and advance our interest in our cause and make a Kiddush Hashem every day in all that you do, Rabbi Yankiv. Thank you so much for your time and for going behind the Bima with us. Any last closing thought that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, we should go in front of the Bima, and I would share some fascinating insights into Nach that I.
Oh. Now your mother's worried that you're not so frum if you're learning Nach.
I want to tell you something. You mentioned October 7th. One of the ways that October 7th changed me, and not that it was October 7th that did it, but it was, I said, I want to be a better person. What's one thing I can start right now that'll make me an infinitely better person? And I said, I should call my parents more often. That makes me a better person. Right. And I call my parents all the time. I share my day with them. And I had almost no relationship with them prior to this.
Wow.
Not that I was avoiding them. It's just that, I'm busy, they're busy, whatever it is. But not a week goes by that I talk to anybody on the phone more than to my mother. And during the eclipse, I went down to the Mexican border, and we got totality. It was mamish and nace because it was cloudy until like a minute before totality, and then the clouds returned a minute after.
Wow.
And it was I davened Hashem, and I'm serious. It was a crazy experience. And I said, wow, this is so profound, this just experiencing totality. I said, I must share this with my father. And so I called him, and he picks up. He says, I'm working now. Is it important? Now, when he says he's working, it means he's learning, because that's what he does. I'm serious. Like he finished Shas 17 times, about 16, 17 times.
Wow.
And just one tiny little tidbit. When my father makes a siyum on Shas, he celebrates by opening his kitchen cabinet. He takes out a bottle of Jim Beam. He makes a l'chaim privately without any fanfare, and then he starts Gemara brachas from scratch, like all over again. That's the kind of person he is. He would cringe if he put down a sefer long enough to know that I'm saying this about him. And I had to like reverse engineer his life to figure out how many times he finished Shas. That's how I came to the number 16, 17. But like, he's never told anybody this.
Wow.
So
well,
yeah.
It's a good thing only the three of us know.
When you call your parents, what language do you speak to them in?
Yeah, more Yiddish. Yeah, kind of a mix, but maybe more Yiddish than English. Yeah, I don't know. I guess.
More Yiddish. Wow.
Yeah, probably more. I mean, I grew up speaking only Yiddish. Like we had a rule: no English in the house. You were only allowed to read English. You were not allowed to speak English.
And then you became an English teacher. I like that.
That's why, I guess.
Right.
That's my way to rebel against the system.
It's a healthy rebellion. It's channeling what others might see as a liability. You turned into an asset and a career, which I think is a great example. And you're doing it in a way that's a Kiddush Hashem. So we really do appreciate the time, and we're looking forward to seeing you in front of the Bima and behind the Bima and not on the Bima and other places as well. Keep doing great stuff.
Thank you, and I hope if I do mess up, that you'll be very gentle, but also very honest with your critique. Like, don't hold back, but just go gentle with it.
Absolutely.
I'm a good listener. I accept. Just not too aggressive.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And that's we feel the same way. We feel the same way. So
thank you.
All right, we'll be in touch. Great to see you. Chag kosher v'sameach.
You too, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I mean, I've told you this many times, Rabbi Goldberg, and I'm not just pandering when I say this. From what I've seen about your community, it looks like the ideal community for surviving the tail end of Galus. I hope, if it's necessary for me to end up there on the way to Mashiach, I hope I'll be guided in the right direction in a clear way. But what you've established is something very special. And Rabbi Broide, you're privileged to be working with Rabbi Goldberg. You know this probably better than anybody else.
My privilege.
And thank you so much for having me.
It's my privilege. We got a great team, and we'd love nothing more than to have you join us. You're gonna have to brush up on our Yiddish, but we'd love to have you here with us.
You'll teach me English. I'll teach you Yiddish.
Oh, it's a good deal. It's a good deal. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Behind the Bima. Catch us next time for another peek behind the Bima.